So you have to picture this. A sitting governor of New York, the fourth largest economy in America, standing at a podium in Albany in March of 2026. And she is doing something governors of New York almost never do. She is begging, not for votes, not for a federal bailout. She is begging wealthy people to please, please come back to her state, because without them, the math no longer works. The woman at that podium is Kathy Hochul, and her story is, on paper, a New York success story. She grew up in Hamburg, a working class town outside Buffalo, the daughter of a family that started out living in a trailer near a steel plant. She clawed her way up through local politics, town board, Erie County clerk, a seat in Congress, lieutenant governor. And then, in 2021, when Andrew Cuomo resigned in disgrace, Kathy Hochul became the first woman ever to govern the state of New York. A year later, she won the job outright. And now, 4 years into running the state, she stood in front of a room of donors and policy insiders and admitted something out loud that her party had spent a decade insisting could never happen. She told them the state's tax base had eroded. She told them she needs the rich to come home. The governor of New York was openly conceding that people and businesses are leaving and that she cannot pay the bills without them. But here is what makes that admission land like a confession instead of a policy update. Because 4 years earlier, this exact same governor stood at a very different podium and said 5 sentences to the people of New York that she would now give absolutely anything to take back. If you live in a high-tax state anywhere in America, pay close attention. Because what happened in New York is not staying in New York. And it starts with what she actually said in that room. So here's what she actually said. Standing at that Politico summit in Albany, Hochul told the room she needs people who are, in her words, high net worth to support, quote, the generous social programs that we want to have in our state. Then she went further. She thanked what she called the patriotic millionaires who had already stepped up. Cut me the checks, she said. And then came the line that ricocheted across the country. If you really want to help, she told them, the first step should be to go down to Palm Beach and see who you can bring back home, because our tax base has been eroded. Read that again. The governor of New York telling her own wealthy supporters to fly to Florida and personally recruit other rich people to move back, like a recruiter trying to win back employees who already quit. And reporters in the room noticed she did not sound triumphant when she said it. She sounded annoyed, as if it were somehow the fault of the people still writing her checks that their friends had already left. Now, why would a governor be reduced to this? Why would the leader of the most powerful state economy in the country be openly pleading for taxpayers to return? Hold that question, because the answer is the entire story. Because here's the promise New York made to its residents for years. Stay here, pay the highest taxes in the nation, and in return, you get the best services, the best schools, the best quality of life on earth. That was the deal. That was the value proposition. You pay more because New York is worth more. And the people quietly voting on whether that promise still holds are not pollsters or pundits. They are ordinary families with a moving truck in the driveway, a nurse in Queens doing the math on her rent, a small business owner in Buffalo watching his property taxes climb, a retiree on Long Island who finally looked at what the same house would cost in Florida or the Carolinas. One by one, they made a decision. And the governor's panic at that podium is the sound of those decisions adding up. But she was not always the one asking people to come back. Once, not long ago, she was practically the one shoving them out the door. And before we get to that, you need to see the receipts. You need to see exactly how many people took the deal New York was offering and walked away from it. Because the number is worse than the governor admitted. And the receipts are brutal. Because while Hochul was at that podium choosing soft words like eroded, the U.S. Census Bureau had already put the hard number on paper. In a single year, the 12 months ending in July of 2025, New York lost a net 137,586 residents to other states. Not to death, not to anything natural. These were living, working, tax-paying people who packed up and chose somewhere else. Only one state in the entire country lost more people that way, California. And when you measure it as a rate, by the share of population walking out the door, New York was not second. New York was first. The worst domestic outmigration rate of any state in America. That is not a conservative talking point. That is PolitiFact confirming the census numbers. And that was just 1 year. Stretch it back across the decade, and the picture gets staggering. Since 2020, New York has lost a net total of more than 1 million residents to the rest of the country. 1 million. Picture the entire population of a city like San Jose simply deciding New York was not worth it anymore and leaving. Now, here is where the governor's defenders try to wave it away. They will tell you that is just the rich fleeing taxes. Who cares? Good riddance. And that brings us to the part that should genuinely stop you, because it is not just the rich. We will get to exactly who proved that, and it is not who you would expect. Think about what 1 million lost residents actually means on the ground. Every one of those people was a customer for a local business, a tip for a waiter, a patient for a doctor, a kid in a public school, a paycheck that got taxed and recycled back into the state. When they leave, they do not just take themselves. They take their spending, their property taxes, their entire economic footprint, and they hand all of it to Texas, to Florida, to the Carolinas. So the governor stood at that podium and called it an eroded tax base. What the census actually documented was an exodus. And here's the thing that turns this from sad to damning. If it were only residents leaving, you could maybe blame the weather or the cost of a winter coat, but residents were not the only thing walking out of New York. The businesses were leaving too. And on that subject, the governor said something so revealing that it should have been the only headline in the state. Because at that same summit, Hochul did not just admit people were leaving, she admitted exactly why, and in doing so, she indicted her own government. Talking about businesses, she said, quote, "We are in competition with other states who have less of a tax burden on their corporations and their individuals." And then she pointed directly at Wall Street firms eyeing a move to Texas and delivered the single most honest sentence of her entire term. "They're not going there," she said, "because they have a nicer governor. I know that for sure. But they're going there because of the tax rate." Stop and absorb what just happened. The governor of New York, a Democrat who has spent her career defending high taxes as the price of a compassionate state, stood in a room and admitted on the record that businesses are fleeing her state because of the taxes she presides over. Not because of crime, she could blame a predecessor. Not because of weather, she cannot control the sky. Because of the tax rate. Her tax rate. That is not an opposition attack ad. That is the chief executive of the state confessing the cause of the bleeding. And it is not hypothetical. According to the Partnership for New York City, the very organization that represents the city's biggest employers, in 2024, Texas overtook New York as the state with the most financial services employees in the country. Let that sink in. Finance, Wall Street, the single industry New York's identity is built on. Texas now has more of those workers than New York does. And in 2025, Texas posted 9% more financial services job openings than New York. The center of American finance is quietly relocating to a state with no income tax, and the woman in charge knows precisely why. So here's the question that hangs over the entire thing. If the governor knows, in her own words, that businesses leave because of the tax rate, what has she actually done to lower it? Hold that, because the answer is the most infuriating part of all. And here is what makes the whole picture even worse. The most quietly devastating verdict on New York did not come from a Republican or from a Fox panel or from a rival politician trying to score points. It came from the one institution that exists specifically to defend the city's finances. And what they were forced to put in writing is the part nobody in Albany wants you reading. That institution is the Citizens Budget Commission. And if you have never heard of it, that is exactly why it matters. The CBC is a nonpartisan budget watchdog founded over a century ago by New York's own business and civic establishment. It is not a right-wing outfit. Its entire job is to take the city and the state seriously, to be the sober adult in the room. So when the CBC studied who was actually leaving New York in 2025, the conclusion it reached should have set off every alarm in the building. Their finding, in their own words, was that New Yorkers of, quote, all incomes, races, ethnicities, and ages were leaving, and that, quote, many differently situated New Yorkers no longer find New York City's value proposition compelling. Read past the polite language and the meaning is devastating. It is not just the millionaires. It is the working class and the middle class. It is the young family and the retiree. The nonpartisan referee looked at the tape and ruled that New York has stopped being worth the cost. The CBC counted roughly 114,000 net residents lost from the city to the rest of the country in a single year. Now connect the three things you have just seen. The census proved residents are fleeing in numbers second only to California. The Partnership for New York City proved the businesses, even Wall Street, are fleeing too. And the nonpartisan CBC proved it is happening across every single income bracket, not just at the top. Three separate, credible sources, none of them partisan, all pointing at the same wound. And here's the part that should make every taxpayer furious. The governor admitted she knows the tax rate is driving them out. She admitted it out loud. And yet there is still no sign of the one thing that would actually slow the bleeding, a real reduction in the tax burden she herself named as the cause. The diagnosis was confessed, the cure was ignored. They knew the whole time and the policy did not change. So, when you put all of it together, the data, the business flight, the nonpartisan verdict, and the governor's own confession, there is really only one conclusion left. And it is the conclusion her 2026 admission was quietly built to keep you from reaching. Because to understand how stunning that admission really was, you finally have to hear what she said in 2022. So here it is. The 5 sentences this governor would give anything to take back. Back in 2022, while campaigning, riding high, certain of her power, Kathy Hochul stood at a podium and aimed her words at the New Yorkers who disagreed with her tax and spend agenda. And this is what she told them: just jump on a bus and head down to Florida where you belong, okay? Get out of town because you don't represent our values. Get out of town. They heard her, and they left. And 4 years later, the very same governor is standing at a very different podium begging her wealthy supporters to fly to Palm Beach and bring those same people home because her tax base, in her own word, has eroded. That is the whole story in one brutal arc. She told them to go. They went. The census counted more than 1 million of them. The businesses followed. Wall Street started decamping to Texas. The nonpartisan watchdog confirmed it was everyone, not just the rich. And then the woman who said get out of town stood up and admitted she cannot keep the lights on without them. You now understand this better than almost anyone watching the cable news segments tonight because they will give you the soundbite and skip the 2022 clip that makes it a confession. New York did not lose its people by accident. Its leaders told them to leave, taxed the ones who stayed, watched the data flash red for years, and only admitted the truth when the bill came due. And whether you live in New York or in any high-tax state in the country, watch closely because the pattern always runs the same direction. They tell you to leave. Then they wonder why you did. If breakdowns like this are what you want more of, the kind that show you the part the soundbite leaves out, subscribe and turn the notification bell on so the next one finds you the moment it drops. And tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment in this video where it clicked for you? Drop it below. Stay informed, stay sharp, and never stop asking who told them to get out of town in the first place.